The rain came down in thick, relentless sheets, turning the parking lot into a shimmering abyss of reflections and distorted lights. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the damp chill creeping into my bones as I watched the security monitor in the dimly lit booth. It was just another graveyard shift, another long night of silence, except for the occasional pattering of rain against the metal roof. I leaned back in my chair, sipping at the lukewarm coffee that had long lost its battle against the cold. The small TV screen flickered between grainy security feeds, cycling through the empty corridors and vast, deserted parking lot. A few delivery trucks sat idle in their spaces, their windows streaked with rain, their hulking forms barely visible under the dim yellow glow of the streetlight. Then, something caught my eye. At the far edge of the lot, just past the last flickering lamp, stood a figure. It was difficult to make out any details through the rain, but the silhouette was unmistakable, tall, motionless, facing the security camera directly. My stomach twisted in unease. I flipped to the next camera angle. The figure was still there, standing just beyond the reach of the light. A chill ran down my spine. The warehouse was locked. No employees were scheduled to arrive at this hour. And yet, someone was out there, drenched in the storm, standing completely still. I turned up the volume on the monitor, but all I could hear was static mixed with the rhythmic pounding of rain against the asphalt. The figure didn't move, didn't waver, just stood there, watching. My first instinct was to call out over the intercom, but as I reached for the mic, the feed flickered. For a split second, the screen went black. When the image returned, the figure was gone. A slow, uneasy breath escaped my lips. Maybe it was a trick of the rain. Maybe I was just seeing things. I switched between cameras, searching for any sign of movement, but the lot remained empty. Then, the feed glitched again. Static crackled across the screen, distorting the image, stretching the shadows unnaturally. And when it cleared, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was back, but closer. It now stood directly under the street lamp, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if listening for something. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening into fists. Every instinct in my body told me to stay put, to not step outside, but I had a job to do. Grabbing my flashlight, I pushed open the security booth door, the cold wind slamming into me, rain immediately soaking through my uniform. My boots splashed against the flooded pavement as I stepped out into the storm, squinting through the downpour. The street lamp flickered overhead. I swung the flashlight beam toward the spot where the figure had been. Nothing. The lot was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took a hesitant step forward, scanning every shadow, every dark corner where someone could be hiding. Then a sound, a wet, dragging noise from behind me. I spun around, my breath hitching. The flashlight beam trembled in my grip. There was no one there, only the vast, rain-drenched lot stretching into darkness. I took a step back toward the booth, my nerves fraying, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. The rain seemed heavier now, the sound almost deafening, like a whisper building into a scream. And then I saw it. The security booth. Through the window, through my own reflection in the rain-slicked glass, I saw the monitor screens inside. The grainy feed still cycled through the cameras, and in the reflection, standing behind me, was the figure, close enough to touch. I never turned around. I never heard it move. I only remember running, the flashlight slipping from my grip, my feet splashing through water as I dove into the security booth and slammed the door shut. My breath came in ragged gasps as I locked it, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the key. The monitors flickered again, static hissed. The cameras now showed only empty, rain-drenched asphalt. The figure was gone. Or maybe it had never left. The rain was unrelenting, hammering against the windshield like desperate fingers trying to claw their way in. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. It was past midnight, and the storm had come out of nowhere, swallowing the highway in sheets of water and mist. My wipers struggled to keep up, barely managing to clear the glass before another wave of rain blurred my vision. The road ahead stretched on in eerie solitude. No other cars, no streetlights, just the endless dark, broken only by the occasional streak of lightning cutting across the sky. I was still over an hour from home, and exhaustion clung to me like a weight. The trip had been long, and all I wanted was the comfort of my own bed. Then I saw him, a man in a yellow raincoat standing by the side of the road. I barely had time to process the sight before I was already passing. His face was obscured by the deep hood, his posture unnaturally stiff. He didn't signal for a ride. He didn't move at all, just stood there, completely still, as if waiting. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the car's heater. I told myself it was nothing, just a stranded traveler or maybe some guy who lived nearby, caught in the storm. But then, a mile later, I saw him again. Same yellow raincoat, same eerie stillness. Standing by the roadside, I hit the brakes instinctively, my heart lurching. I had just passed him. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. No side roads, no cars. My hands tightened on the wheel. My breathing came shallow. I pressed down on the gas, forcing myself to focus on the road. It had to be a trick of the rain, a coincidence. Maybe there were two people wearing the same coat. Maybe. The phone rang. I jumped, nearly swerving off the road. My hands fumbled for my cell, my pulse hammering in my ears. The number was unknown. I hesitated. Then, with shaking fingers, I answered. Static. Faint, crackling static. Barely audible over the rain pounding on my car. Don't look back. The voice was a whisper. Garbled, distant, like someone speaking from the other end of a long tunnel. The line went dead. I slammed the phone onto the passenger, my breath coming in short gasps. My whole body screamed at me to pull over, to stop and think. But some deeper instinct, some primal fear I didn't fully understand, kept me driving. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back, but I felt it, a presence, something watching me. The rain was louder now, deafening, drowning out the sound of my own thoughts. My headlights barely cut through the downpour, but I kept going, pushing my car faster, desperate to leave that stretch of road behind. Then, the headlights flickered, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see the reflection in the glass, a shape in the back seat, a hooded figure dripping wet, sitting impossibly still. I didn't scream, I didn't breathe, I just drove. The road blurred beneath me, my mind refusing to process what I had seen. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, to get out, to run. But I knew somehow, deep in my bones, I couldn't. Not until I was home. Not until I was safe. I don't remember the last stretch of the drive. It was a haze of rain, headlights, and panic. But eventually, the familiar outline of my apartment complex came into view, and I swerved into the parking lot, my tires skidding against the wet pavement. The car was empty. The back seat was dry. I sat there, gasping for breath, my fingers still clenched around the wheel. The rain poured down, steady and merciless, as if nothing had happened. Maybe nothing had. Maybe I had imagined it. That's what I told myself as I locked the car, as I rushed through the downpour to my front door, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. The apartment was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it before leaning against the wood, my heart still racing. I was safe. I was home. Then, from outside, through the steady drumming of the rain, I heard it. A soft knock at the door, slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another knock. And then, a whisper, just beyond the door. Don't look back. The rain hadn't stopped for hours, turning the streets into glistening rivers of distorted neon reflections. I sat alone in my small apartment, curled up on the couch, with nothing but the hum of the TV and the rhythmic patter of water against the window to keep me company. It was one of those nights that felt stretched, unnatural, like time had slowed just enough for something to slip through the cracks of reality. I should have been in bed. Work was early the next morning, but something about the night felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me since sunset, an itch in my brain that refused to go away. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the power went out. The apartment was swallowed in darkness, the TV's static cutting off abruptly. I blinked, disoriented, my heart immediately picking up its pace. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, the weak glow barely enough to push back the shadows. The rain outside seemed louder now, as if the loss of power had made everything else more pronounced. The wind howled through the alley behind my building, rattling the old fire escape. But something else caught my attention. A sound, a soft, wet tapping, coming from my window. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Through the dim glow of my phone's light, I could just make out the glass pane, streaked with rain, fogged up slightly from the cold. And then, a shadow moved. Not the wind, not the rain, something outside. I sat frozen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. My apartment was on the 5th floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, wide enough for someone to stand on. But as I watched, the shadow shifted again, a dark outline barely distinguishable against the night. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deliberate, almost curious, as if something was testing the barrier between us. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to move, to slowly, carefully edge toward the window. My fingers trembled as I reached out and wiped away a patch of condensation, just enough to see outside. The alley below was empty. The fire escape still rattled in the wind. There was nothing there, except my reflection, only it wasn't quite right. The version of me staring back through the glass was smiling, and I wasn't. A sharp breath caught in my throat, panic seizing every muscle in my body. The reflection tilted its head slightly as if studying me. Then, so slowly it made my skin crawl, it raised a single hand and pressed it against the glass. A wet, pale hand, not mine. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from my grip and clattering to the floor. The lights spun wildly across the walls, casting frantic shadows. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I scrambled for the door, every nerve screaming at me to run. Then, the window creaked, a slow, agonizing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was climbing inside. I tore open the door and bolted down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. The emergency lights in the building flickered weakly, casting eerie, stuttering shadows. Behind me, I heard something move. Not footsteps, something wetter, like bare skin dragging across the floor. I reached the stairwell, my shaking hands gripping the railing as I practically threw myself down the steps. The whole building felt wrong, like the walls had stretched taller, the shadows deeper, the air heavy. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. By the time I reached the lobby, my lungs burned, my entire body trembling from terror and exhaustion. The front door was locked. It always was at night. But my hands fumbled with the deadbolt, twisting, yanking, desperate. Then, just behind me, a whisper. "Why are you running?" Cold breath on my neck. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the rain, my feet hitting the flooded pavement as I sprinted into the empty street. The night swallowed me whole, the city around me silent, watching. I didn't go back. Not that night, not ever. The next day, when the landlord went to check my apartment, he found the window open. Rain had soaked the floor. And there, pressed into the fogged glass from the inside, was a single perfect handprint, too large to be mine. The rain poured in heavy sheets, drowning the empty streets in a cold, suffocating silence. I had never been a fan of storms, especially at night. There was something unsettling about the way the world felt smaller, darker, like the rain wasn't just falling, but pressing down, trapping. That night, I was alone in my car, driving home from a late shift at work. The highway was nearly deserted, save for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. My wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour, and every so often, lightning would streak across the sky, illuminating the road for a split second before plunging everything back into shadow. I should have taken my usual route. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the simple desire to get home faster. But instead of the main road, I turned onto a narrow, winding path that cut through a dense stretch of forest. It was supposed to be a shortcut. It wasn't. The further I drove, the heavier the rain became. Trees loomed on either side of the road, their skeletal branches stretching toward me like grasping fingers. My headlights barely cut through the mist, and every turn felt endless, unfamiliar. The road was slick, and I gripped the wheel tighter, my stomach twisting with unease. Then I saw her, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding against the wet pavement. My heart lurched into my throat as the car came to a screeching stop, just feet away from her. A woman. She stood there motionless, her head tilted slightly to one side. Her hair was long and dark, plastered to her face and shoulders by the rain. Her dress, pale, almost white, clung to her thin frame, soaked through. But it was her face that made my skin crawl. Even in the dim glow of my headlights, I could see that something was off. Her features were blurred, indistinct, as if the rain was washing them away. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening. Every instinct screamed at me to drive. Just go around her, don't stop, don't look back. But my body refused to move, frozen in place by something deeper than fear. Then, she took a step forward, slow, deliberate. I didn't wait. Slamming my foot on the gas, I swerved around her, my tires kicking up water as I sped down the road. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if she was still standing there, or worse, if she was closer. The road twisted and turned, the forest growing darker, the rain heavier. I just needed to get home. Just needed to... A whisper, software, right behind. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air inside the car had turned ice cold, and in the reflection of the windshield, barely visible through the streaks of rain, a shape, sitting in the back seat. I didn't think. I just reacted. I yanked the wheel hard to the right. The car skidded, spun, then crashed violently into the trees. The impact sent a shockwave through my body, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the rain was still falling. The car was totaled. The windshield cracked, the engine dead. My head throbbed, my vision swimming, and then a soft tapping, tap, 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 on the driver's side window. I turned slow, reluctant. She was there, closer now, leaning in, her face inches from the glass. Her blurred features had sharpened, revealing something twisted, unnatural. Her mouth stretched too wide, her eyes empty pits of darkness. She smiled. The door unlocked. I don't remember what happened next. The next morning, a passing driver found my car abandoned on the side of the road. The door was open. The seat was soaked from the rain, but I was gone. And on the fogged-up window, in dripping, uneven letters, was a single message. You shouldn't have stopped. The rain was relentless, drumming against my apartment window like impatient fingers tapping on glass. I lived alone, and nights like these always made the silence feel heavier, as if the storm outside was pressing in, waiting for something. I'd spent most of the evening watching TV, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping over me. There was no reason to feel afraid. I was in my own home, doors locked, lights on. But something about the night felt off. It started with the knocking. 3 soft, deliberate taps on my front door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was nearly 2 a.m. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? I hesitated before getting up, creeping toward the door as quietly as I could. Peering through the peephole, I expected to see a neighbor. Maybe someone lost in the rain. There was no one there. I stood still, listening. The hallway outside my apartment was empty, dimly lit by the flickering overhead light. The only sound was the rain pounding against the building. Maybe I imagined it. I turned to go back. 3 more knocks. This time, louder. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I looked through the peephole again. Still nothing. I reached for the deadbolt, double-checking that it was locked. A shiver ran through me. Something about this didn't feel right. I took a step back. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Why won't you open the door?" My breath caught in my throat. A cold chill crept up my spine. My hands shook as I typed back. "Who is this?" No response. The knocking started again, louder, more urgent. I backed away from my mind raced. Call the cops, run, stay silent. Then I heard it, a soft, rasping breath. Not from outside, from inside, behind me. I turned around so fast I nearly tripped. My apartment was empty. The living room, the kitchen, silent. My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the storm was just playing tricks on me. Then I saw it, the closet door, slightly open. I hadn't opened it. I stared at the dark gap, the sliver of blackness that seemed deeper than it should be. My entire body screamed at me to run, to get out, but I couldn't move. A shape shifted inside. Something was in there. I ran. I didn't stop to grab my keys. I didn't look back. I tore out of my apartment and into the hallway, the door slamming behind me. I didn't care about the rain, about my bare feet against the cold tile. I ran until I reached the lobby, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned, expecting to see something following me, but the hallway was empty, too empty, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the whole building was holding its breath. My phone buzzed again. A new message. "You left the door unlocked." I never went back. The landlord called me 2 days later. He said my apartment door was open. He checked. Everything inside was untouched, except for one thing. The closet door was wide open, and inside, pressed into the wall, was a single perfect handprint, too large to be mine. The rain fell in a steady, suffocating rhythm, turning the streets into mirrors of the darkened sky. I was alone that night, working late at the small bookstore. The store had been in my family for years, an old, creaky place nestled between 2 abandoned buildings, forgotten by time. Business had slowed over the years, and most nights I locked up early. But something kept me there that night. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the feeling that if I left too soon, something would be waiting for me outside. At exactly 11:43 p.m., the lights flickered. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. The wiring in the building was old, and heavy rain always messed with the power. Still, I decided to wrap up for I went to the back room, grabbed my bag, and headed toward the front door. Then, the bell above the entrance chimed. Someone had just walked in. I froze. The store had been empty for hours. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't seen anyone through the large glass window. But as I turned around, my breath caught in my throat. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, unnaturally so, his head nearly brushing the top of the frame. His clothes were soaking wet, his long coat dripping onto the wooden floor. But it wasn't just the water that unsettled me, it was his face, or rather, the absence of it. His features were blurred, indistinct, like someone had smeared them away. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky breath. "Sorry, we're closed," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, silent, the rain dripping from his clothes, pooling at his feet. I took a step back, my hand tightening around my bag. "Sir, we're closed," I repeated, this time louder. Then he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He tilted his head, just slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The air in the store shifted, grew heavier. My ears started ringing, and for a split second, I swore I could hear something underneath the storm outside. A whisper, just beneath the sound of the rain. I turned to grab my phone to call someone, anyone. When I looked back, he was gone. The door hadn't opened, the bell hadn't chimed, but the floor where he had been standing was still wet. I stood there, heart hammering, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I needed to leave. Now, I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door and stopped. A wet footprint, not outside, inside, leading further into the store. My entire body went rigid. Slowly, I followed the trail with my eyes. The prints led between the bookshelves, disappearing into the aisles. Someone was still here. I backed toward the door, my breath shallow, my fingers shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The silence was deafening. The ringing in my ears grew louder. Then, a book fell, a soft thud, deeper in the store. My throat tightened. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out, but my feet refused to move. Another book fell. Then another, slow, deliberate, like something, was letting me know exactly where they were. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the door open and bolted to the rain, the cold water slamming against my skin, soaking in seconds. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. When I finally looked back, the store was dark. But in the window, a shape stood just beyond the glass, watching. I never went back. The next day, my boss called me. He asked why the store had been left unlocked. I told him I had run out in a hurry. He sighed, told me everything was fine, nothing had been stolen. But then he hesitated. Actually, he said, there was one thing. I held my breath. One of the books, he paused. It was open on the front counter. I felt sick. Which book? The ledger. He cleared his throat. Someone wrote something, a name. The line went silent. Then he read it. My name, written in shaky, dripping letters, like someone had traced it with wet fingers. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers of black water. I hated nights like this, nights when the world felt empty, when the sound of the storm drowned out everything else. It made me feel alone. Or maybe it made me feel like I wasn't alone. I had just finished a late shift at the diner where I worked. It was past midnight when I locked up and started the walk home. Normally, I didn't mind. My apartment was only a few blocks away, and the quiet streets were usually peaceful. But that night, something felt wrong. I first noticed it when I turned onto a narrow alleyway that cut through to my street. I had walked this path 100 times before, but tonight, it felt different. The air was heavier. The rain didn't just fall. It pressed down, thick and suffocating. Then I saw him, a man standing at the far end of the alley. He was barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight, but I could make out his shape, tall, unmoving. He was dressed in dark clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. He wasn't walking, wasn't heading anywhere. He was just standing there, waiting. I slowed my pace, my pulse quickening. I didn't want to turn around. I was so close to home, but something about him set every nerve in my body on edge. Then he moved, not toward me, but closer. I don't know how to explain it. He didn't take a step. He didn't shift. But suddenly, he was closer than before. I blinked. He was closer again. I didn't see him move. He just was. My breath hitched. I forced myself to keep walking. Faster now, my hands clenched into fists. The rain poured harder, blurring my vision. I glanced up again, and he was gone. The alley was empty. I exhaled sharply, a shuddering breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I imagined him? Maybe the rain, the darkness, it was messing with my head. I told myself I was just tired, just paranoid. Then I stepped into my apartment building, and I felt it. The air was wrong, heavy, stale. I shook off the rain and headed toward the stairs, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I took the steps quickly, my wet shoes squeaking against the tile. As I reached the 2nd floor, I hesitated. A sound. Software behind me, footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was following me. I turned my head just enough to glance down the stairwell. My breath caught in my throat. He was there. The man from the alley, standing at the bottom of the stairs. His hood was still up, his face still hidden, but I could feel him watching me. I didn't wait. I bolted up the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, my heart hammering. I reached my door, fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. I could hear the footsteps behind me, closer now, faster. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted, and slammed the door shut behind me. Silent. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I waited, listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no knock. Just the sound of the rain. After a long moment, I forced myself to move. I checked the peephole. The hallway was empty. I locked the deadbolt, double-checked it, triple-checked it. I let out a shaky breath and turned around. My apartment was dark, the only light coming from the neon glow of the city outside my window. I told myself I was safe. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You left the door unlocked. My stomach twisted. Number, no, I didn't. I checked the door again. It was locked. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone, my fingers cold and numb. Then another message came through. I'm inside. The lights flickered, and behind me the closet door creaked open. The rain was merciless, pounding against the windows of my apartment like desperate fingers trying to claw their way inside. The wind howled through the streets, carrying with it an eerie wail that sounded almost human. I lived alone in a quiet neighborhood, too quiet. Most of my neighbors were either elderly or rarely home, which meant that nights like this felt even lonelier. I didn't mind, though. Solitude had always been a comfort, until that night. It started around 12:30 a.m. I had just finished watching a movie and was about to head to bed when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should close your curtain." A chill ran down my spine. My curtains were open, the dim glow of my living room spilling into the rain-soaked street below. I turned off the TV, heart pounding, and slowly approached the window. The street was empty. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows against the pavement. I scanned the area, searching for anyone who could have sent the message. Nothing. Just the rain, the wind, and the oppressive darkness. I shut the curtains. Another message. Too late. My blood ran. I stepped away from my breaths coming fast and shallow. My mind raced. Was this some kind of sick joke? A prank? I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on my front door. Not loud, not urgent, just patient. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. The front door led to a small hallway, and the only way up was through the main entrance of the building, which was locked at night. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I hadn't heard footsteps in the hallway. Knock, knock, knock. My heart pounded against my ribs. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and typed back, "Who are you?" The response was instant. "You already know." A shiver crawled down my spine. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do, what to say. I took slow, careful steps toward the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silent. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the flickering overhead light. I exhaled shakily. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was tired, on edge of the storm. I turned away from the door. Knock. But this time, it came from the window. A sharp, deliberate tap against the glass. My stomach twisted into knots. No one should be able to reach my window, not unless they were on the fire escape. But when I turned around, my curtains were still drawn. Then, a slow, dragging sound from inside the apartment. I turned so fast, I nearly lost my balance. My living room was empty, but the closet door in the hallway, it was open, just an inch. I hadn't opened it. A sickening dread settled in my stomach. I took a step back, then another. My breath hitched as I reached for my phone, fingers trembling. Another message. "I'm already inside." The closet door creaked open wider, and the lights went out. The rain had been falling relentlessly for hours, a steady rhythm that filled the silence of my apartment. Nights like this always made the world feel smaller, the sound of the storm drowning out everything beyond my four walls. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt suffocating. I lived alone in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the fifth floor of an old building, the kind of place that creaked when the wind blew and had locks that felt too flimsy against the weight of the darkness outside. I usually didn't mind, but that night something felt wrong. It started just after midnight. A soft knock at my door. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over my phone. I wasn't expecting, and at this hour, no one should be here. Knock. I swallowed hard and crept toward the door. The peephole was old and slightly warped, but when I pressed my eye against it, I saw nothing. The hallway was. My breath came out unsteady. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the wind. But as I turned away, knock. Closer, but not at the door. At my window, paralyzing chill spread through. My apartment on the fifth floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, no possible way for anyone to be outside my window. The rain lashed against the glass, making it impossible to see beyond the curtain. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking. A message buzzed onto my screen. "Let me in!" The number was unknown. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. The air in my apartment felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I turned back to the window, my heart hammering. I reached for the curtain. Another message. "Don't!" I froze. The phone slipped from my grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. My hands trembled as I took a step back. The room felt colder now, the shadows stretching unnatural in the dim light. Then, a low, distorted whisper from behind the curtain. Not words, just something breathing. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my body screaming at me to run, to get out. Knock! The sound came from inside the apartment, the closet. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The door was slightly open, just enough to see the sliver of darkness beyond it. My phone buzzed again. You shouldn't have looked. The lights flickered, and from the closet, something stepped out. The rain fell in heavy sheets, drowning the city in a curtain of water. The wind howled between the buildings, making the windows rattle in their frames. I had always liked the sound of rain. It was soothing, a white noise that kept the world at bay. But that night, it felt different. That night, it felt like a warning. I had just come home from a late shift at work. My apartment was small but comfortable, perched on the sixth floor of an old building downtown. The kind of place where the walls were thin and the lights flickered when the storm got too strong. I was used to it, but as I stepped inside, shaking off my wet jacket, I felt it immediately. Something was wrong. The air was thick, suffocating. My living room was exactly as I had left it. Sofa, TV, a few books scattered on the coffee table. But something about it felt off. Then I noticed the footprints, wet, leading from the window. I hadn't opened my window. A cold dread curled in my stomach. Slowly, I followed the footprints, my breath coming in shallow gasps. They led across the wooden floor, past the kitchen, to my bedroom door. It was open just a crack. I lived alone. I told myself it was maybe I had tracked in the water myself. Maybe I had left the window open earlier without remembering. But deep down, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out with shaking, a message from an unknown number. "You left your window unlocked." My skin went cold. My window had been locked. I was sure of it. My pulse thundered in my as I took a step back. Then, another message. "I'm still here." The closet door inside my bedroom creaked. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look. I just bolted. My feet slammed against the floor as I sprinted down the hallway toward the front door. I fumbled with the lock, hands shaking, heart pounding. Then, a breath right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The door finally gave way and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. I ran down the stairs, not stopping, not looking back. I didn't breathe until I was outside, standing in the freezing rain. I called the police. They searched my apartment, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no messages on my phone. But I know what I saw. And when I finally worked up the courage to go back inside, I noticed one last thing. My bedroom window was open, and in the closet, a single, wet footprint. The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the roof and windows with an almost furious intensity. I sat alone in my apartment, curled up on the couch with a book in my hands, the dim glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the room. It was supposed to be a quiet night, but then my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived alone in a secured building where visitors had to be buzzed in. No one had called from downstairs. My pulse quickened as I set my book aside and stood up, creeping toward the door. I hesitated before checking the peephole. The hallway was empty. The rain pounded harder, a steady drumming against the glass. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the wind rattling the old doorbell wiring. Then it rang again. This time, it was long, insistent, a sharp, grating sound that made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard and checked the peephole once more. Still nothing. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed a quick message to the building manager. "Someone's messing with my door. Can you check the security cameras?" I waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. The only sound was the rain, filling the silence like a warning. Then my phone buzzed. The response made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "No one has entered the building in hours." I stared at the message, my breath hitching. A chill crept up my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I turned back to the door, heart pounding. A soft tap against the peephole. I stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. Someone, something, was on the other side. But I had seen nothing. My phone vibrated again. "Get away from the door. Now." I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran into my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed my back against the wall, gripping my phone with white-knuckled fingers. Another buzz. "Don't open your window." I hadn't even thought about it, but now I heard it. A soft click, the unmistakable sound of a latch being undone. My stomach dropped. The rain outside distorted the glass, making it impossible to see clearly. But as I turned my head ever so slightly, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, inside the room with me. I lunged for the light switch. The bulb flickered, sputtering before it finally illuminated the room. There was no one there. The window was shut, locked. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting, listening. Eventually, exhaustion. I didn't sleep, but I stayed curled in the corner until the rain stopped, until the sun rose and bled through the blinds. I finally worked up the courage to step out of my bedroom. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. No signs of forced entry, no messages on my phone, no proof that anything had happened at all. But when I reached the front door, something made my breath catch in my throat. The peephole had been smashed in, like something had been looking inside. The rain had been falling for hours, an endless cascade of water that made the streets shine like black glass. I had always loved the rain, the way it turned the world quiet and distant. But that night, it felt different. That night, The rain didn't feel like comfort. It felt like a warning. I was alone in my apartment, curled up on the couch with a half-finished cup of coffee, scrolling through my phone. It was nearly 2 a.m., and I should have been asleep. But the storm was too loud, the wind howling through the alleyways like a wounded animal. Then came the first knock, software, almost hesitant. I looked up, my stomach tightening. My apartment was on the third floor. The only way in was through the front door, and I hadn't buzzed anyone up. Another knock. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. I stood slowly, my heart hammering as I crept toward the peephole. The hallway outside was dimly lit by a flickering bulb, casting long, jagged shadows. And there, standing just outside my door, a man. He was tall, dressed in a soaking wet hoodie that clung to his frame. His head was tilted downward, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his. I didn't recognize. He didn't move, didn't shift or shuffle his feet, just stood there, shoulders hunched, his breath fogging up the peephole. A sickening dread settled in my. Then he knocked again, louder this, more insistent. I backed away, gripping my phone with trembling fingers. I opened the message, ready to text my neighbor, when my screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Don't open the door. I stared at it, my pulse thundering in my ear. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but before I could type anything, a second message. He's not knocking to come in. He's knocking to see if you're alone. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned back toward the peephole. The hallway was empty. The man was gone. But the knocking, it came from my bedroom window. I spun around, my blood running cold. The window was closed, the glass slick with rain, but as I took a step closer, my phone vibrated again. Don't move. He sees you. I froze. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened glass, but behind it, a figure. Inside the room with me. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. I don't remember running down the stairs, bursting in soaked street, or screaming for help. But I remember the last message before my phone slipped from my shaking. You left the door unlocked. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, hammering against the windows of my small apartment. I had always found comfort in the sound, the way it drowned out the distant hum of the city and made the world feel smaller, more contained. But that night, the rain felt different. It felt heavy, suffocating. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen when my phone buzzed. A single notification. Unknown number. Are you alone? I frowned, my stomach twisting into knots. It had to be a prank. I didn't respond. Instead, I locked my phone and set it down, brushing it off as a wrong number. Minutes passed. The wind howled. The apartment felt colder. Then, another buzz. Unknown number. I see you. I swallowed hard. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone, hesitating before responding. Who is this? The reply came instantly. Come to the window. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't move. My apartment was on the fourth floor. No balconies, no fire escape. Just a sheer drop to the rain-drenched pavement below. There was no way anyone could be outside my window. My breath hitched as I slowly turned my head. The window was fogged up, the condensation distorting the view beyond. But there, in the center of the glass, a handprint. It wasn't mine. The imprint was too large, too defined, the fingers long and unnaturally slender. My chest tightened. My apartment was locked. No one had been inside. The phone vibrated again. I'm already here. A soft creak echoed from the bedroom. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was slightly open, a sliver of darkness bleeding into the dimly lit hallway. I knew I had closed it earlier. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and stepped forward, forcing my breath to steady. My fingers trembled as I pushed the door open wider. The room was empty, but the closet door, it was open just an inch. My phone buzzed in my shaking hand. Check the closet. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out, but something kept me frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. The rain outside intensified, drowning the world in static. I reached for the closet handle. My fingers barely grazed it when, bang! The door slammed shut on its own. My phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. My vision blurred as panic took over, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Then, the closet door creaked open, an inch, a slow, agonizing. Through the growing gap I saw it, a smile, wide, unnatural, stretching far beyond the limits of any human mouth. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. Don't remember bursting into the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor as I sprinted for the stairwell. I only remember one last thing. As I reached the front door, I glanced back, just once. And in the darkness of my apartment, barely visible through the rain-blurred window, something waved. The rain poured relentlessly, a never-ending torrent that turned the city into a maze of reflections and shadows. I had always loved rainy nights, the way they made the world feel quieter, almost peaceful. But that night, the rain wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I had just finished my shift at the diner, my clothes still smelling faintly of coffee and fried food. The streets were nearly deserted as I made my way home, the dim glow of streetlights flickering in and out like dying embers. My apartment wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but the walk felt longer than usual. Halfway home, I noticed something strange. A man was standing under a flickering streetlight, perfectly still. His back was to me, his shoulders hunched under a long, soaked coat. At first, I thought he was just another unfortunate soul caught in the storm. Then he tilted his head, not turned, tilted, like he was listening. A strange unease coiled in my stomach. I quickened my pace, my shoes splashing through puddles. The closer I got to my apartment, the more I felt it, the weight of being watched. By the time I reached my building, my hands were shaking. I shoved the key into the lock and pushed the door open, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't dare look back. Once inside, I locked the door behind me. My apartment was small but familiar, safe. I let out a slow breath and tossed my bag onto the couch. The rain hammered against the windows, filling the silence. Then, my phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. Why did you run? A shiver ran down my spine. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Who is this? No response. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. I checked the windows. Locked. The door. Locked. Everything was secure. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Check your closet. My breath caught. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway. My bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of darkness stretching from within. I could see the closet from where I stood. The door was slightly open. I knew I had closed it that morning. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave, to run, but something deeper, some primal, morbid curiosity kept me rooted in place. I took a step forward, then another. The air felt thicker, heavier. My fingers shook as I reached for the closet door. The phone vibrated one last time. Unknown. Number. Don't let it out. The closet door burst open. A shadow lunged. The last thing I saw before everything went black was a pair of two wide eyes staring into mine. The rain had been falling all day, and by nightfall, it had turned into a deafening downpour. I sat alone in my apartment, the dim light of my bedside lamp barely pushing back the darkness. The sound of the rain against the window should have been calming, but instead, it made me uneasy, like it was trying to drown out something I wasn't supposed to hear. I had lived in this apartment for 2 years, and nothing strange had ever happened, but that night, something felt off. It started with a soft tapping. I froze. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the bathroom mirror. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was just the pipes, just the building settling. But the tapping continued, slow, deliberate, like someone was testing the glass from the other side. I stood up, my pulse pounding in my ears. The rain outside intensified as I stepped toward the bathroom. My bare feet felt too loud against the floor, each step sending a new wave of dread through me. The door was slightly open. The light inside flickered weakly. I swallowed hard and reached for the switch. The second my fingers brushed it, the mirror cracked. A jagged line split across the glass like lightning, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something staring back at me, not my reflection. Its face was pale, almost colorless. Its eyes, wide, hollow black pits, bored into an intensity that made my skin crawl. Its lips were stretched into a grin that didn't belong on any human face. And then it moved. It tapped on the glass. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The light flickered violently, and in that split second of darkness, I heard it. A whisper. Let me in. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I got out. Don't remember sprinting through the rain, the panicked breaths that tore through my throat. But I do remember one last thing before I left my apartment forever. As I threw one last glance over my shoulder, the cracked mirror reflected something that shouldn't have been there. A shadow, standing in the doorway, smiling. The rain drummed against the window, an endless, rhythmic tapping that filled the silence of my apartment. I had always found rainy nights peaceful, a kind of quiet retreat from the chaos of everyday life. But that night, something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the storm refused to let up, the rain falling in thick, unrelenting sheets. Maybe it was the strange, hollow feeling in my chest, the creeping sensation that I wasn't as alone as I thought. It started just after midnight. A knock at the door. I froze. No one ever visited this late. My heart pounded as I crept toward the peephole, hesitating before looking through. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the weak, flickering bulb overhead. But there was someone standing outside my door, a woman. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her thin frame. Her long black hair hung limply over her face, obscuring her features. She didn't move, didn't shift uncomfortably the way a normal person would in the cold rain. She just stood there, completely still. A chill crawled down my spine. I should have ignored it. I should have walked away. But then, she knocked again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I swallowed hard. forcing my voice to stay steady. Who's there? Silence. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, drowning out everything else. Then, in a voice barely louder than the rain, let me in. My skin went cold. Something about her voice was wrong. Flat, emotionless, almost mechanical. Like she was just saying the words, but they didn't belong to her. I took a step back, every instinct in my body screaming at me to stay away. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. With shaking hands, I lifted it, my breath hitching when I saw the message. Unknown number. Don't open the door. I glanced back through the peephole. She was closer. Her face was still obscured by her wet hair, but now her head was tilted unnaturally to the side, like her neck was barely holding her up. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. She's not alive. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. My hands were shaking as I double-checked the locks, making sure the door was secure. Another knock, louder, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing her to go away. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. I waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Slowly, I stepped forward, peering through the peephole once more. The hallway was empty. No sign of her. A shaky breath of relief escaped my lips, and I backed away. Maybe it had been a prank. Maybe I had imagined it. But just as I turned toward my bedroom, I heard it. Not at the door, at my window. A single, deliberate tap on the glass, and a voice. You should have let me in. The rain had been falling for hours, an endless downpour that turned the streets into rivers and filled the night with an eerie, muffled silence. I'd always loved the sound of rain, but tonight it felt different. I lived alone in a small apartment on the third floor. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had just finished watching a movie when the power flickered. The TV screen went black for a second before coming back on. Static. I frowned and grabbed the remote, flipping through channels, but every single one was the same. Static. Then, the screen changed. A grainy black and white feed replaced the static. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was my apartment building. The camera angle was high, like a security feed, capturing the entrance downstairs. The rain blurred the image, but I could make out a figure standing at the front door. They weren't moving, just standing perfectly still. I felt a strange unease creep up my spine. Then, the figure looked up. Even though the image was grainy, I knew they were looking right at me. My breath caught in my throat. That didn't make sense. How could they know? I was inside my apartment, on the third floor. Then the screen glitched and the image changed. It was now showing the hallway outside my apartment. My body went cold. The hallway was empty, but something about it felt wrong. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. And then, a figure stepped into frame. Slow, deliberate. They moved like their limbs didn't bend the right way. Their head tilted at an unnatural angle. Their clothes were soaked from the rain, water dripping onto the floor beneath. I couldn't see their face. I didn't want to. I jumped to my feet, backing away from the screen. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone. Before I could dial, the TV screen glitched again. Now, it showed my front door. The figure was right outside. A shadow passed under the doorframe. Then, a knock, softly, almost polite. I held my breath. The apartment was silent except for the rain pounding against the windows. Then another knock, louder, and then a whisper. Let me in. My stomach dropped. The voice was wrong, like it was layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The screen flickered one last time. The feed changed. It was now showing inside my apartment. The camera was behind me. I turned and saw a reflection in the dark window, a face, grinning, right behind me. The rain had been relentless all evening, drumming against the windows in a constant, suffocating rhythm. I'd always loved the sound of rain, but tonight it felt like a warning. I lived alone in a small house at the edge of town, where the nearest neighbor was a good 15-minute walk away. The isolation had never bothered me. In fact, I preferred it. But something about the storm tonight felt different. At around midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Are you awake? A chill ran down my spine. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't recognize the number. I typed back. Who is this? No response. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the coffee table, shaking off the unease. Probably just a wrong number. Then, a knock at the door. My breath caught in my throat. It was soft, almost hesitant. I wasn't expecting anyone. I slowly stood, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor as I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, my stomach twisted. There was someone standing in the rain. Their back was turned to me, shoulders hunched. Their soaked clothes clung to their thin frame, rainwater pooling at their feet. They weren't moving. I swallowed hard. Hello? They tilted their head. Not turned, tilted. I took a step back. My heart pounded in my ears. Something about the way they stood, the way their head moved. It wasn't right. Then my phone buzzed again. I grabbed it with shaking hands. Unknown number. Don't let them in. I dropped the phone. My body was ice cold. I turned back to the door, but they were gone. Only the rain remained, pounding against the steps outside. My stomach churned with unease. Had they left? Just like that. A long, slow breath escaped my lip. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just someone seeking shelter from the rain. I locked the door and turned away. Then, a knock at the window. I froze, slowly, with every muscle in my body screaming at me to not look. I turned my head and saw them, standing at the window, closer now, their heads still tilted, their soaked hair covering their face. Their hand was pressed against the glass, leaving streaks of water trailing down. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what it said, but I did. Unknown number. They're already inside. A floorboard creaked behind me. The rain had been falling all night, thick and heavy, drowning the world in an endless downpour. I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, watching as the streetlights outside flickered in and out of existence, swallowed by the storm. It was the kind of night that made the world feel smaller, isolated. I had just finished washing the dishes when I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was open. I never left it open. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. I could have sworn it had been shut earlier. Trying to shake off the unease, I stepped closer, peering into the darkness beyond. The air inside the room felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. Then, just as I reached for the light switch, my phone vibrated on the counter. I turned away from the door, swallowing hard as I grabbed it. A message. Unknown number. Close your bedroom door. Now! I nearly dropped the phone. My breath hitched. I turned back toward my bedroom, pulse hammering in my ears. The door was still open. I couldn't see anything inside, but I felt something, watching, waiting. I wanted to believe it was a joke, a prank, but deep down I knew better. Slowly, I reached out and pushed the door shut, my hands trembling. The second the latch clicked into place, the knocking started. From the other side, soft at first, almost polite. Then it grew louder, more insistent. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from my grasp. My mind raced for an explanation, but there wasn't one. I was alone, or at least I was supposed to be. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched through the apartment. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows. Then, a whisper. Let me out. The voice was wrong. Layered, as if more than one person was speaking at the same time. Their voices tangled together into something inhuman. My hands clenched into fists. Number, I wouldn't open it. I wouldn't. My phone vibrated again. Unknown. Number. You already did. I felt the breath leave my lungs. Slowly, I turned my head back toward the door. It was open, and something was standing in the dark, smiling. The rain had been relentless, drumming against the windows like 1,000 desperate fingers. I sat in my small apartment, watching the water streak down the glass, distorting the world outside. It was past midnight, and the city felt dead. No cars, no voices, just the sound of the storm swallowing everything whole. I had been dozing off on the couch when my phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. Look outside. A cold shiver ran through me. I hesitated before slowly turning my head toward the window. At first, I saw nothing but rain and darkness, but then, a figure, standing on the sidewalk across the street. They were facing my window. My breath hitched. The figure didn't move, didn't shift against the cold, just stood there, staring up at me. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't move. Don't blink. My chest tightened. My fingers curled around the phone, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I forced myself to look back at the figure. They were closer, now standing at the edge of the street. I hadn't looked away for more than a second. How had they moved that fast? The next message came immediately. Unknown. Number. You blinked. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I felt dizzy, nauseous. I didn't dare turn away this time. Didn't even breathe too hard. Then, the streetlight flickered, and they were right outside my window, face pressed against the glass. A grin stretching too wide, too unnatural. Their breath fogged up the window. Their eyes, black, bottomless holes, boring, and my phone slipped from my fingers. The light flickered again, and they were inside, standing in the middle of my living, dripping wet, grinning. The last thing I heard before the lights went out completely was a whisper. I told you not to blink. The rain fell in thick sheets, hammering against my apartment windows, drowning out every sound except its relentless rhythm. I had always found comfort in rain, but tonight it felt oppressive, almost suffocating. I had been scrolling through my phone when I noticed something odd. The screen kept glitching, the text distorting, stretching into unreadable symbols before snapping back to normal. I chalked it up to bad signal and set the phone down. That's when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. A nervous chill crept up my spine as I glanced at the time. 2:13 a.m. Slowly, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there, just the rain. A single drop of cold sweat slid down my temple. I exhaled, trying to shake the unease, but just as I turned to walk away, ding dong, the doorbell rang again. I spun back around, heart hammering against my ribs. My hands trembled as I looked through the peephole again. Still nothing. I took a shaky breath and stepped back. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the storm was messing with the wiring. Then, a knock, software almost too gentle. My stomach twisted into knots. And then my phone vibrated. I picked it up with trembling hands. Unknown number. Don't open the door. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my gaze back toward the door, my body frozen in place. The rain seemed to grow louder, as if something outside was pressing against the walls, the windows, surrounding me. Then, another knock, louder. Then another, and another. Fists pounding against the wood, faster and more violent. The doorframe shook with the force of it, and then silence. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what it said, but I did. Unknown number. Too late. And before I could react, the lights went out. In the pitch darkness, I heard it, breathing, inside the apartment. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets into rivers of glistening black water. I sat alone in my apartment, the dim glow of my lamp barely pushing back the suffocating darkness outside. The power had flickered twice already, and I had the growing sense that I wasn't as alone as I thought. At exactly 1:47 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. You left your bathroom light on. My heart stilled. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, but the light inside was off. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. Who was this? My apartment was on the 5th floor. No one could see inside unless they were already in here. I swallowed hard, standing up on shaking legs. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave, to get out. But my feet carried me forward instead. With a trembling hand, I pushed the bathroom door open. Darkness, silence, nothing. I exhaled shakily, relief washing over me. Maybe it was a prank, a mistake. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Don't turn around. I went ice cold. A slow, creeping dread slithered up my spine. I could feel it now, breathing, watching, right behind me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then, the bathroom light flicked on by itself, and in the mirror I saw it, a tall, twisted figure, smiling, standing right behind me. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against my apartment windows in a steady, suffocating rhythm. I sat alone on my couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the distant hum of the city, muffled by the storm. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. There's someone in your closet. My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard and glanced toward my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, revealing only a sliver of darkness beyond. I lived alone. For a moment, I sat frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had the wrong number, but then a soft creak came from my bedroom. I sucked in a sharp breath. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe. Another creak. Slowly, I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me. Step by step, I made my way toward the bedroom, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. I reached the door, hesitating before pushing it open wider. My room was dim, lit only by the flickering streetlight outside. The closet door was open, just an inch, enough to see darkness inside. I gripped my phone tightly, my fingers slick with sweat. I was being ridiculous, right? There was no one in there. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, and then something inside the closet moved. I stopped breathing. A faint rustling sound came from the darkness, like fabric shifting. Then, a whisper, so soft I almost didn't hear. I see you. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Close your eyes, now. I barely had time to react before the closet door swung open, and something crawled out. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against my apartment windows in a steady, suffocating rhythm. I sat alone on my couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the distant hum of the city, muffled by the storm. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. There's someone in your closet. My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard and glanced toward my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, revealing only a sliver of darkness beyond. I lived alone. For a moment, I sat frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had the wrong number, but then a soft creak came from my bedroom. I sucked in a sharp breath. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe. Another creak. Slowly, I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me. Step by step, I made my way toward the bedroom, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. I reached the door, hesitating before pushing it open wider. My room was dim, lit only by the flickering streetlight outside. The closet door was open, just an inch, enough to see darkness inside. I gripped my phone tightly, my fingers slick with sweat. I was being ridiculous, right? There was no one in there. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, and then something inside the closet moved. I stopped breathing. A faint rustling sound came from the darkness, like fabric shifting. Then a whisper, so soft I almost didn't hear. I see you. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Close your eyes. Now. I barely had time to react before the closet door swung open and something crawled out. The rain hammered against my window, a never-ending symphony of sound that filled the silence of my apartment. I had always loved the rain, but tonight it felt different, heavy, suffocating. It was almost 3 a.m., and I was struggling to keep my eyes open. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark room as I mindlessly scrolled through social media, trying to ignore the eerie stillness outside. Then my phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. Don't answer the door. I frowned. My tired brain struggled to process it. Maybe a prank? A wrong number? Knock, knock. My stomach dropped. Slow, deliberate. Coming from the front door. I stared at my phone, my pulse thudding in my ears. How did they know? Knock, knock. Louder this time. More insistent. I hesitated before standing up, my body moving before my mind could stop it. Step by step, I approached the door, my breath shaky. I pressed my eye against the peephole. Nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway, stretching into darkness. No one was there. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I see you. A chill crawled up my spine. I stumbled back, my fingers tightening around my phone. My mind raced. Was someone watching me? Hiding? Then, the doorknob turned, slowly. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it rattle, like someone was testing it. Then, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. It's inside. And from behind me, a whisper. You took too long.